I've just read your second week talking about how much freedom you have, and some of you don't, and some of you do, but mainly the specifics of types of programs that you're using, and I'm trying to get to the gist of it. Three Stooges. I have a Three Stooges clock. It is now 4 o'clock. Now, this is really interesting, nitty-gritty stuff. I'm not going to try to look up master all these like my perspectives and Saxon math. I have some familiarity with it because my kids had it in school in some cases, or reading mastery or some of the others. But this is really the key to having success as a teacher, and feeling that the program you're using is meaningful and engaging to your students, and at the same time gives you freedom to be somewhat creative. That's why I mentioned that term. I wanted you to say, is everything scripted? Some of you are a little more comfortable with scripting. There are certain tendencies we all have. One is when we go in to do a job of any kind, we want to have some kind of a pattern or a rubric or something, so we kind of know where we are. We know what the standards are. Some of you mentioned standards. Some of you mentioned, I think Dana mentioned some of the places that in the Christian curriculum that some of them were not challenging enough, or the science was boring. And see, that's part of it. I always compare it to like going to a restaurant or being a cook or something. You got to put some spice in the food so it's tasty. It has to be appealing. Those of you mentioned that when you start on some of the scripted, that the kids actually dread that time of day, or the kindergartners don't get to go out and play as much as they should get to play. That really bothers me, because that's unnatural. That's not the way school should be. Kudos to those who fought back, and I see that Accelerated Reader met its end in one school. Thank you, Sarah. And of course, I think from what I was reading that most of you, or some of you, mentioned that you liked accelerated reading, but it was because it was great. If you like to read, it gives you time to read. It's wonderful. But for those students who don't like to read, and I forget who it was because I can't recall all the names. I took some notes, but then it gets so slow. Slows my reading. Take too many notes. But that when some of the questions on the Accelerator Reader say something like, what kind of muffins? Somebody said, what kind of muffins did Nancy Drew bake? I mean, that's really not the essential part of a novel or a story. You want to kind of get to the conflict, the antagonists, the way the author describes a scene or sets up things, or makes it interesting. What makes it exciting? And that's why, Harry Potter is so popular. I mean, by the very nature of it, it's an adventure, and reading should be an adventure. It should not be a chore. If it's a chore, I saw this in many of your what you've written, that kids grow to hate reading. If they grow to hate reading, you've defeated the whole purpose of teaching reading. It's like teaching someone to eat healthy and all they get are kale milkshakes or kale shakes or veggie burgers or things that are pretty bland and tasteless. And so people grow to hate that. And they say, no, I want to go to McDonald's. I want salt, and I want lots of milkshakes and sweet Cokes, and I want a big cheeseburger that has 1,400 calories in it. And you want people to have something nutritious and satisfying. I'm sorry, I guess I'm hungry, so I'm going into food. But I really enjoyed, especially the English teachers. Nolan, I'm going to look at these in a minute. I found that I didn't want to go through and read these to you, obviously, because you can read them yourself. But there was lots of good situation. Not everything was a win, but as I said, Sarah kind of battled against Accelerated Reader, and Elizabeth, you talked about you know, computer programs and places where it wasn't structured, like at Holdridge, that you were using free stuff and you didn't have the money for the more expensive stuff, like ABC, Starfall, and AB, using those free sites, but you needed the budget. So sometimes money, you want structure, but and then you have the issue of getting together with your co-teachers. You know, there's a big push now in co-teaching, and on the surface, it sounds pretty cool because it probably helps with management. And, you know, there's two bodies in there with the kids, so two people kind of keep control of the kids. But also, you have to be compatible. You know, it's you don't want to force marriage, or you want people that have certain things they agree on. But the Saxon math is interesting. Elizabeth, you mentioned it, that we had a thing called Michael Eaton math, which the guy went out of business years ago in the space of a weekend. But he basically was an attempt to copy the Saxon math and profit from it. And what was interesting in the specifics is, and my daughter had this problem, is that the concept was never established. And then they moved on to something else, and they came back to it a month later, called stranding, I think they called it. But there's certain things that we need in our life. I've been using the food metaphor, but we want a sense of completeness in our learning. I want to understand multiplication or division, and I want to have a pretty good concept established so I understand what's going on. I don't want there to be ragged edges to where I kind of get it right, but I don't know why. I'll give you an example from my own life. I studied chemistry in high school, but I never liked chemistry. It was always, I figured out how to get the right answer, but I didn't know why I got the right answer. And back in the 60s and 70s, we didn't even have a really good concept, and certainly it wasn't taught, what actual chemical molecules look like. What is the structure? What happens when this structure is broken down by heat, or water causes sodium, something happens, we don't know what. And I said, so conceptually, I could move around symbols, but I would get the right answer. And when we had multiple choice, it wasn't too hard because I only had 4 possibilities and one of them was right. But when you're dealing with the world of chemistry, there's no multiple choice in real life. You have to get it correct. You have to know what's happening. And so we'd find ourselves not really knowing, but guessing and hoping we got it. But I never liked chemistry until I had to help my daughter in high school she took chemistry. And then I started going on Khan Academy, and then I found out all kinds of little tricks about how to balance equations, stuff that existed before, but no teacher ever accessed it for me. So I didn't understand it. But I'm trying to see which one I'm on. This might be a little long, but forgive me. This stuff is really good. Let's see, 6, and that's 5. So that is from the previous one. So that was Sarah's 4, 5. Yeah. Sarah, you talked about you have the freedom at Central Catholic to teach. Interesting. I was able to, for various instrument petting zoos, having my kids write their own raps and chords. Now, what you're doing there, and if you guys read this on page 5 or whatever, if you print it off, is Sarah's exposing kids to music, and said they brought the kids got to mess around with the instruments. They got to touch them and see what they're like. It's like a petting zoo. What you know, and that's brilliant. very good entry there. I like fake injury day. That's cool. I still have over there, I still have my little packet of fake vampire blood. I want to be a vampire. It's probably all dried up now. It's not real vampire blood. Um, but think of them now, some people frown on the multiple intelligences. If you don't know, that's an idea that we learn through our senses. I mean, well, that's not a new idea, but multiple intelligence has said that you can use math to teach English, and you can use, because if you really think there are creative ways to do it, you can use history to teach music. You can talk about music in the old days, or you can teach about the Civil War by showing cooking and food and nutrition, how the soldiers lived. Well, those are interesting because they stimulate you, that a student that may not really care about history and reading in a book, but they love to get a chance to sample what went for C rations, or the food the soldiers had to eat in the field. Believe me, it wasn't good eating. But when you give alternative ways for kids to experience the knowledge, it's very stimulating to them. Emily had a great entry here on teaching music. I know nothing about this, and talking about, some people are so rigid, and this is another thing. People get committed to a certain ideology or approach, and it's got to be that or nothing else. Now, English as a second language is just like that. A long time ago, we used to teach people to memorize, or we teach people to repeat after me, and they just say, the pencil is red, el lápiz es rojo. And then we'd do that over and over, and we'd say, oh, they speak Spanish. And then when we get them in front of somebody, they don't know what to say except the pencil's red. So it wasn't applicable. It wasn't useful. It didn't allow them. And I really enjoyed this. I know nothing about it, but Emily's and Sarah's conversation about music instruction was very informative, very instrumental. I'll use that. I like puns. Lauren, yes, Lauren, you talked about amplify science, but there's sometimes rigidity in these, and we get into the whole deal of state standards, and we want to use those as a framework, but we still want to fill in with something meaningful and engaging for our students. So when I hear the word alignment and standards, that kind of turns me off. Of course, I have to tell you where I'm coming from. I like poetry, I like novels, I like writing, I like mythology, and I like the looser, more ancient standards, I would say. I believe you can discuss literature by looking at the construct of mythology about the hero, because you always have a hero in a movie or a book or something, or an anti-hero, and you always have an adventure they have to go on. They have to survive, or they have to conquer something, or they have to at least internally change in some fundamental way. Here's one I circled. Who was this? Oops, would be again on Laura. Oh, who's there? Lauren. Oh, okay, Lauren. You have a lot of freedom to design some of your things in Amplify Science. I hope that when in this class, one of my goals is that we're sharing the details. Not only the frustrations and some things we can't change right now, or you can't change, but that there's a nice little mention here, the quote, although designing everything ourselves at my school in Dubai has been time consuming and challenging, the process has built the capacity of us as teachers and as a team. I feel as though my job is that of a designer and curator, not a robot or compliance-based employee. So that was a great quote from Lauren, and I appreciate that. I like the idea of you're a curator of knowledge. you expose people to it. You try to, it's like having a museum. Here's a Mona Lisa, but I'm not going to make you memorize details about what the Mona Lisa, how it was painted and all that, but I want you to just first grasp the beauty of it and how cool it is. Here's another one, Joanna. You talk about, I'm learning there's some flexibility in being able to use my own resources, but only as a supplement to the basal series. So I see that there's some conflict here, and that you're working at you're trying to nurture your own creativity and approach your students, and you always have to be careful and cover yourself. And you say, well, I'm adhering to what you said over here, and some of this stuff like the Go Math, some of those materials are there. And so you kind of protect yourself, which is cool. And that's what that's a good little nugget for you to take away from my meanderings here, is that you find ways that you can hang your hat on it, or you can point back to it and say, I'm still playing by the rules. I'm just doing a little differently. And that helps, because sometimes you can get bullying. You must do it the same way. That really bothered me. I forgot who said it, but the whole idea of people coming to your classroom and making sure you're on the same page on the same day at the same minute on the script, that horrifies me. It just, I can't even imagine. It's like, let's say, communism or some rigid ideology. We all must teach in the same way. I'm thinking, why don't we get robots and replace teachers with robots? And the robots will be more than happy to do the same thing over and over again. And at a tremendous savings. And of course, education will fall apart. And I like the statements on anti-Saxon coming from, is it Rebecca? Yes. Thank God. Okay. Thank God. Big Ideas Math finally took over from Saxon. That's good. And you mentioned different layered curriculum methods and things like this. And you have a principle that gives you, Rebecca, gives you freedom. That's what I say when you go for a job. You want to look at that. I know that those that are already in teaching know a lot about looking for certain markers, things that they like or don't like. And you don't want to find out that you're going in to be a clerk instead of to be a teacher. And I appreciate a lot Dana has said in teaching at a religious parochial situation. A couple of you do that. You're always seeking to get away from whatever imposed curriculum there is if you feel it's not differentiated enough. And then Sarah, you talk about the ELL situations. Sometimes the materials, despite the fact it may say it's ELL, they're not really meeting the needs of the students, and it's over their head. That's a whole different ball game, I know, but I appreciate that. I might send you an email. I want to know more about what you like in the ELL area, what you've seen. Now, as a college person, I teach more from the theory, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm a curriculum specialist, although on paper, my degree is in that. But I spend more time in college curriculum than I do in teacher ed stuff than I do in specific programs that'd be used in a public school or parochial school setting. And of course, cost has a lot to do with it. Dana, you mentioned, I would encourage everybody to read Todd Whitaker's What Great Teachers Do Differently, 17 Things That Matter Most. And I'd recommend that. There are similar books like that, but I would recommend that. And you could probably Google it and look up what the 17 are. But think about what you're doing, regardless of where you teach. If you're teaching in a religious school or something, you still have to be, nothing takes away from the need to engage the students and to stimulate them and to have quality curriculum. Dana, you did a good job talking about that, your principal said, yes, it's a Christian school, but we want to have excellence in teaching. And historically, we know that a lot of education and knowledge came down through religious institutions. You know, there weren't public schools 1,000 years ago. We forget that's mainly a product of America and some enlightened countries in Europe. And I like English, so I like hearing from Nate. And gosh, who's my other English person? Well, I'll get to that. See, Emily, I can't remember. I can't keep everybody straight while I'm just talking on here. Okay, so I have some things I'd be interested in. When we get into the groups, I'll mention this to the English people. I don't quite have my little list in front of me to mention it, but the English people at the high school, about, you know, what's the structure you teach in novels? Do you more traditional, you know, settings, tone, antagonist, protagonist? What is the conflict? You know, I remember we used to analyze and talk about the setting and tone and things like that. And sometimes the term tone was always difficult to get across to students. We'd read a separate piece, and what were the others? Animal Farm, things like that. And I have an extensive background in literature, so that's why I mention that. Okay. Well, anyhow, and Molly, good old Molly. Yep, there we go. A new reading curriculum in Schuyler. Yes. Okay. And I'll probably talk to you some more too. And you just have to fight, you know. Sometimes people get there's a certain joy in rigidity. I'll know soon enough I'll be in a nursing home and people say, you must be up and eat at 8. And I'll say, I want to sleep till noon. They said, how would we know you're alive at noon, you know? I said, because I'll be snoring. But I'm a person who likes sleep late. I've gotten bad habits because of teaching online and stuff. Really, there's no one to talk to. Nobody's online working at 8, 10 in the morning. And so my whole life's evolved to evenings. Anyhow, I appreciate these. I really enjoy reading these. This is not just responding to something I put up, but you're putting a lot into this new stuff that I'm learning. And I think what I'll probably do is come up with some idea, make a list of the top. I like top 10 lists like David Letterman used to have, and have a top 10 list or 5 list of the best programs or approaches you like to use in your area, whether it's reading or elementary science or middle school, or PE. I don't want to forget my physical education guy. But I appreciate your entries here, and I love reading them. I hope this isn't too long and boring a statement here, but I'm just wanted to let you know that I don't like to sit here and write individual responses. I do that for a lot of classes, but for this particular class, I wanted to do more conversation. So I'm conversing with you. You can converse with me, and then we'll do our Zooms and we'll converse all over the place. Thank you.